Good morning. Thanks for joining this talk on AI and machine learning in medical devices. I'm really excited to be here on the final day of MD&M's Virtual Engineering Week to be with you. And I've really been looking forward to participating in the real-time chat that's going to be happening with all of you over the next 30 minutes. As you already know, while this is a recording, the real-time me is with you in the chat session right now, ready for a good conversation. A big thanks to the team at MD&M and especially Lori and Naomi for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I'm Bernhard Kappe, the CEO of Orthogonal, a developer of software as a medical device and connected devices. AI can be used in many ways, from improving manufacturing to predicting when your hardware needs maintenance, or the best route for a UPS driver to deliver packages. These are all valuable, but I'm going to be talking about using AI as part of your medical device, because that's where I think the greatest value is. My background is in mathematics and artificial intelligence. I've been in software development for about 25 years, worked at Microsoft on business intelligence, then in financial services, and about 12 years ago got into medtech and eventually into the software as a medical device space. When I got into the space, I was intrigued by the gap between best practices outside of the medical devices and what was being practiced inside. And since then, I've been working on bringing agile and other fast feedback techniques and using them to optimize both speed and quality of medical device products. My company, Orthogonal, helps medical device and pharma companies build software as a medical device and connected device solutions. We have deep expertise in technologies like mobile, cloud, AI algorithms, and device connectivity. We've worked on everything from insulin pumps and CGMs to active implantables for neurostimulation, and with non-medical device companies like Google and Bose. We've developed efficient processes within our ISO 13485 quality management system designed to accelerate our clients' pipeline of successful software as a medical device products. Let me give you a bit of background on how AI became so important in our world. 9 years ago, Mark Andreessen, founder of Netscape and partner in the VC firm Andreessen Horowitz, wrote a famous article in the Wall Street Journal. His observation was that software is eating the world in all sectors. In the future, every company will become a software company. So how has that statement aged? Pretty well, I think. If you look at the world in 2020, software eating the world continues to happen. Companies like Apple, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are all worth well over $1 trillion. In the case of Apple, last I checked, $2 trillion. Software keeps becoming more important and is disrupting more industries as we continue to become more connected. Now, some of this is because the hardware that supports all of this software keeps following Moore's law. That is, it doubles in capacity and capability for the same cost every 18 months. Just take a look at the original iPhone from 13 years ago compared to the new iPhone 12. Now think of what that will look like in another 5 years. This has happened in so many different areas, in connectivity, in storage, in processing power, that what you can do with software just continues to accelerate. We currently have 30 billion IoT devices. We have 4.4 billion internet users, 3.5 billion smartphone users. That is a lot of data. In fact, it's 40 trillion gigabytes or 40 zettabytes, and more of that data is on the cloud, accessible from all kinds of devices. And it's increasing by about 15 to 20% per year. Software is helping to create a lot of that data and consuming that data. And AI is a big way that that data is being consumed. AI can find connections in that data, it can draw inferences from it, create algorithms, and continue to improve those algorithms that are beyond what people can do on their own. And as a consequence, software is eating the world even faster. Let me give you an illustration of how this is impacting products outside of the medical device space. A recent story in the Wall Street Journal reviews the Apple AirPod Pros a year after their initial review. This is not a review of new AirPod Pros. This is a new review of the same AirPod Pros 1 year later, and it's a much better review. What's different? Better software. Apple, during that year, kept collecting data and feedback and continued to improve the software to the point where the journal did a whole new glowing review of the product. A lot of that was using AI. Or take Tesla. One of the reasons that Tesla is valued as much as the 3 largest car makers combined is because they work more like a tech company than a car maker. There's hardware here, but it's modular, and software plays a much bigger role than in traditional vehicles. Data is continuously collected, the algorithms are working, and there are updates that improve the performance on a frequent basis. These devices get better in large part because of AI. Real-world data comes in from usage at scale, from other data about users, their environment, the world they live in, and what they do. AI can discover new patterns and correlations that humans can't, and turn those into algorithms much faster than humans can, and continue to improve them while humans are sleeping. Those same patterns are also happening in medical devices. Let me give you an example. This is from our client, Quidel, who makes many point-of-care diagnostics, including some for COVID-19. They announced this at their Investor Day on November 1st. In this new system, rather than a large standalone machine, there's a small diagnostic device able to read a standard Sophia fluorescent immunoassay cartridge. And then images of the cassette are captured on the Sniffles device and transmitted via Bluetooth to a mobile app. The result is then interpreted using a proprietary AI software model that is downloaded and part of that mobile application. This has a number of advantages compared to the previous versions. First is affordability. The manufacturing costs are less than 20% of the cost for their current Sophia 2 platform. Second is mobility and connectivity. Cellular connectivity and cloud integration enables testing in new markets beyond traditional point of care. Third is rapid manufacturing. The devices themselves are much simpler to produce, so manufacturing at scale is much easier and much faster. And fourth, and just as important, is the ability of the algorithm and the device to continue improving. The AI algorithm can be improved over time through continuous offline learning, and then the new locked models can be brought onto the mobile application. I'll give you another example. PhysIQ is another customer of ours, and they have a number of clearances for AI-based personalized cardiac anomaly detection for at-risk patients. Their approach is based on detecting changes to baseline heart functioning, data that they get from off-the-shelf wearable vital signs monitors. The original idea came from their previous company, Smart Signal, which had initially put sensors on aircraft engines, did monitoring to establish a baseline, and then could predict engine failure based on differentials to that baseline. They sold that company to GE Digital in 2011, and the technology is now monitoring more than 16,000 assets worth $37 billion across many industries. They applied the same approach to heart monitoring with PhysIQ, originally by constructing algorithms in a similar way. But as they went on and got more data, they switched to using neural networks to generate the algorithms for detecting changes. That they found that this is just a much faster way of generating better algorithms and continuing to improve them over time. So the FDA has been dealing with algorithms for a very long time. They've cleared the first AI-generated algorithm, I believe, in 2014. And since then, the number of cleared and approved algorithms has been increasing at an accelerating pace, about 50% per year. This infographic from the Medical Futurist shows some of these approvals and clearances broken down by area, like radiology, cardiology, psychiatry, and endocrinology, with new areas appearing every year. Now, most of these algorithms are locked algorithms. That is, they were generated by AI, but they don't change in production. It's the same algorithm rather than a continuously learning one. That makes it easier for regulators like the FDA to evaluate them. They've been evaluating algorithms for a very long time. Now, if you notice, radiology has the most clearances, and there are good reasons for this. This is all about data analysis, and there's a lot of data that has been analyzed. And the reference standard that algorithms are evaluated against are two radiologists looking at an image, and that is part of every workflow in radiology. So in that case, it becomes theoretically possible to do continuous updates to the algorithm in production, which is not something that had been foreseen by the FDA. So this is a new problem set for the FDA, and while they haven't issued formal guidance on it, they did conduct a workshop on this issue earlier this year, before COVID hit, and published a discussion paper on changes to AI and machine learning-based software as a medical device. It's a pretty good paper in terms of laying out processes that should be in place, and it fits in with both the SAMD pre-certification program and their guidance on when to do regulatory filings for software updates. It's a good read. I'd urge you to read it. Now, I wanted to share with you some of the things we've learned along the way, as well as from other experts that you should consider as part of your AI journey. The first thing is to really think about where AI might add value to your medical device. In general, that is any time you can potentially discover something that you couldn't before. Trends or correlations, for example, FICA credit scores happen to be strongly correlated with therapy adherence and outcomes. Also think about when you can take existing algorithms and improve them and continue to optimize them. Quidel, Apple, or Tesla are examples of that. And often you're combining both of these things, new trends with algorithm optimization. There are a lot of examples out there already. You should review them and think about how those might apply to you, both inside medical devices and, as we see in the example of PhysIQ, outside of medical devices. Second, you need to understand how complex your problem is, both in terms of the domain and the inputs. The more complex these things are, the more data you're going to need to train and verify your models. For example, take Quidel sniffles. There's a standard assay, one camera with a fixed distance and fixed lighting conditions. Now contrast this with using a smartphone camera to take pictures of skin to identify skin cancer lesions. In that case, you don't have a standard assay, you don't have one camera with a fixed distance, you don't have standard lighting conditions. You're going to need a lot more data. I mean, a lot more data. We've done both of these things, and it's exponentially more data, even if you don't take into account all of the different smartphone models that you might be doing this on. And if you need more precision, you're going to need even more data. So really planning around that and understanding that from the start is going to help you in terms of thinking about the feasibility and what you're going to need to do to design for this. The third thing you need to think about is the availability of a reference standard for your AI model. Whenever you're testing an algorithm, you need to think about what you're comparing it to, the reference standard. As I mentioned before, in radiology, the reference standard is two radiologists interpreting the data, which is already part of the workflow. So the cost of validating an algorithm and a new version of an algorithm is pretty low. And that's one reason why there is so much AI activity in radiology. So if you look at glucose monitoring by contrast, one of the things you need to do is to assess the performance of a CGM system is to generate a MARD score, mean absolute relative difference. MARD is the average of the absolute error between all CGM values and matched reference values, which are gotten from blood tests. Getting those blood tests has a cost, and it's not part of everyday practice. Not every time that you are getting a CGM reading do you also get a blood test, especially since you're getting CGM readings every few minutes or so. So you need to pay for those when you update your algorithm. That makes it much, much more expensive to evaluate and validate the new algorithms. So one of the things you really need to take into consideration is how much is it going to cost to get that reference standard? How easy is it to administer that? Because that's really going to impact your ability to continue to improve your algorithms and demonstrate that. Another thing to consider is data availability and quality. This includes your own data. How are you making sure that it's good data, that you can trace where it came from, isolate bad data, make sure that training data is separate from verification data, etc. And then you may have third-party data that you're bringing in, so there's potentially a lot of that. There are large data sets that may be available from registries, outcomes data correlated with reference data. Non-medical data sources, we've used things like weather, pollution, the aforementioned FICA scores. And you want to think about how you deal with potential issues with that data. You don't have control of that. Some of this is not medical device grade data, and you want to evaluate the trade-offs, which can be a tricky thing. Another thing to take into consideration here is bias in the data, both in the collection and interpretation. Just because something works for one population does not mean it translates to another. So you need to think about the populations and your setup to avoid bias. Now, of course, it would not be a medical device if you didn't have to consider patient risk. So a solution that helps to determine when and how to remind patients on therapy, as an example, for adherence might be pretty low risk or may not even be a medical device. A diagnostic aid to help physicians make better decisions, like many imaging solutions, or PhysIQ as an example, is pretty low risk. That's one reason why we see a lot more in diagnostics. The benefit is high and the risk is relatively low. An instrument that provides a diagnosis independent of a physician, like IDX-DR, which provides automated diagnosis for a diabetic retinopathy, is higher risk than the previous ones. And an algorithm that automatically changes insulin dosage based on history, CGM readings, patient inputs, etc., is a lot higher. Take one that automatically changes pacemaker settings, and you have something that's even higher. So that patient risk is going to affect how much testing you need to do, how much you need to think about some of the edge cases, how much risk analysis and risk mitigation you need to do, and how much scrutiny you're going to have for your algorithm by regulatory bodies. The last thing you need to think about here is how and where you're going to deploy your algorithms. Deploying them in the cloud is in many ways the easiest. You have lots of processing power, you can scale easily, you can define the specific GPU or FPGA or ASICs that you're using, likely the same one you trained your algorithm on. So that's the case with something like PhysIQ, relatively straightforward. Now, devices typically don't have the same processing power. We don't see an awful lot of AI algorithms deployed on devices, although if you have very, very large devices with lots of computing power, it is possible, and there are some that are done that way. We see a lot more, however, where AI algorithms, locked algorithms, are then deployed on the cloud or deployed on mobile applications. That's an example. Quidel Snuffles that we looked at earlier is an example of that. If you've engineered your apps for modularity, it can be pretty easy to update the algorithms in your apps, but there's a lot more work in translating and testing your algorithms. Different smartphones have different floating point precision in their GPUs, often much less than what you would be able to get in the cloud where you trained this. And so you might need to do a lot more tuning of your algorithms and testing those for specific smartphones. And with all the variety of smartphones out there, that can be a lot of work. So there's a lot that goes into AI in medical devices. We only have a 30-minute talk here, so I'm not going to be able to give you an entire course on this. But I thought I'd give you a couple of best practices to get you started. First, whether you're using AI or not, you should design for data capture from the start. That means you want to instrument your devices and your apps to collect all the data you can. That's patient-generated data, forms data, user behavior, smartphone sensor data, device usage, and device sensor data. You want to think about third-party data and the quality of that. You want to, especially things like outcome and reference standards data, and think about where to put data and how to show where it came from and how it was used. So this is core to building modern connected medical devices in the digital age. And it's not something that is just for clinical trials, but you want to capture this in the real world when you're out in production, because that is all the stuff that those AI algorithms will work on to improve the product. The second thing that implies is that you need to design your processes for continuous improvement. As we've seen in the other areas, more and better data keeps becoming available, as is better AI. So you need to think about how to design for efficient updates. There are a lot of best practices out there for automation and software as a medical device that you can leverage here. They apply to software in general. They can be applied within the medical device space, and they definitely apply to AI. So I'm going to leave you with a quick story from outside of medical devices. In 1997, Deep Blue, a computer program that was hand-coded, beat Garry Kasparov, who was at the time the reigning world champion and possibly the best human chess player ever. It was a crushing blow. Looking back on it, Kasparov has said that he was likely the first knowledge worker whose job was threatened by a machine. Since then, computers have been steadily improving, mostly through AI. AI programs routinely beat the world's best human players, and the new challenges around humans playing programs that start with a pawn down or more. My brother Dietrich, also Orthogonal CTO emeritus, and a much, much better chess player than I am, has been working on the new Dragon algorithm for Komodo this year, applying new NNUE, or neural network updated efficiently techniques, and just beat American Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura with a 2-pawn deficit, 5 wins and 3 draws. A knight or a bishop is next. Kasparov has had a long time to think about AI since his defeat in 1997. Here's what he had to say in a recent Wired interview. To quote, "I think it's important that people recognize the element of inevitability. When I hear outcry that AI is rushing in and destroying our lives, that it's so fast, I say, no, it's too slow. Every technology destroys jobs before creating jobs. So I think it's important that instead of complaining, we look at how we can move forward faster, get over the job destruction part and towards the job creation part. With future machines, I describe the human role as being shepherds. You just have to nudge the flock of intelligent algorithms. Just basically push them in one direction or another, and they will do the rest of the job. You put the right machine in the right space to do the right task. That's all for my talk. Thanks for listening. I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to your questions.